See the looking. Oh, the mic is liking me right now. Mm. Right now, anyway. Well, okay, darlings. Back for part three of the 2024 um, American, or rather, the prisoner international, let's just say, international prisoner exchange since the Cold War. And I think it's the largest. So let's do a deeper dive per the Washington Post. Who are the people who were actually freed? Because there is a total of 24, right? So there were journalists, there were a former U.S. Marine, and political activists. They were released or freed by Russia in exchange for the release of one convicted Russian assassin imprisoned in Germany and several Russian intelligence operatives and hackers held in the United States and elsewhere in Europe. So the deal is complicated, obviously, and the complete list was put together by the Washington Post. And of course, there are still Americans being held in Russia as we speak. First, as for the U.S. citizens and legal residents, we have Evan Gerskovich. He is a Wall Street Journal reporter and was working as a correspondent in Moscow in March of 2023 when Russian security forces detained him on charges of espionage. Russian prosecutors said, quote, he collected secret information, unquote, about the Ural Vagonsavod, sorry, a military factory in Russia's Yekaterinburg region while, quote, on assignment from the CIA, and unquote. Now, the White House says the charges were wholly fabricated and declared him wrongfully detained. This is a designation that commits the U.S. government to work for his release. The case made him the first American journalist formally accused of being a spy in the country since the Cold War. He had a closed door trial with secret evidence, which began in June, and by mid July, he was sentenced to 16 years in prison. And in June, John Kirby, the national security spokesman for the White House, reiterated, quote, Evan has never been employed by the United States government. Evan is not a spy. Journalism is not a crime, unquote. The next U.S. Citizen, sorry, I was trying to stifle a sneeze. Released is Paul Whelan, a Marine who became a corporate security executive. Paul Whelan had been detained in Russia since 2018. He is among the longest held and most high profile of the Americans detained in Russia. He has citizenship in four countries: the United States, Canada, Britain, and Ireland. While he was visiting Russia to attend a wedding in late 2018, the Russian Federal Security Service arrested him on accusations of espionage. And the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accused him of being caught, quote unquote, red handed during a spy mission where he was to retrieve a flash drive with sensitive information. Whelan's attorney at the time said his client unwittingly received a flash drive during the visit and has maintained his innocence throughout, saying that he was framed and he thought the drive actually contained holiday photos from a friend. The State Department has also declared Whelan wrongfully detained, and in 2020, he was sentenced to 16 years of hard labor in a prison colony. Next is Alsu Kormasheva. The same day Gerskovich was sentenced in July, a Russian court convicted Alsu Kormasheva, 47, a Prague based editor with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, of spreading false information about Russia's military. The Russian Armenian journalist was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. She had been living in Prague with her husband, Pavel Buterin, and their two teenage daughters, but she was detained in Russia in June 2023 at the end of her trip to see her ailing mother. Officials confiscated both of her passports, preventing her from returning home. And during Kurmasheva's detention, Butorin and his daughters would send postcards, but her responses became increasingly infrequent and censored per her family. The next American prisoner or was released. I believe he's a resident, a U.S. resident, Vladimir Kara-Murza, one of Russia's most courageous opposition figures. He returned to Russia in April 2022, although his friends had begged him not to. He was a contributing columnist for the Washington Post and was arrested after his return for speaking out against the war in the Ukraine in speeches in the United States and was charged with treason. He rejected the charges as, quote, unfounded, illegal, and politically motivated, unquote. Kara-Murza continued to campaign against President Vladimir Putin and the war in columns for the Post written in prison. He previously had been poisoned twice. Holy cow. And he believes this to have been done by Russian authorities and developed a nerve condition known as polyneuropathy. His 25-year sentence and poor health meant he likely faced death in prison. In a recent column with the headline, I am not a foreign agent, he wrote that he faces more charges on top of the 25-year term. And, quote, it appears the Russian state is not done with me yet, unquote. And the prisoner going freed and is going to Germany is Lilia Chanisheva, 42, who is the head of opposition leader Alexei Navalny's regional office, and Bashkortostan, who was convicted in a closed trial last year on extremism. What is it? Extremism. I can't even pronounce it. This is so horrible. Extremism. No, that doesn't sound right. Oh, hot dang. But that is what it is. On those charges, Navalny died in prison in February under mysterious circumstances. Now, for Ms. Chanisheva, she worked at top international accounting firms, PricewaterhouseCoopers and Deloitte and Moscow, before returning to Bashkortostan to expose local corruption in videos that went viral. She was blocked from running for local office and harassed by security agents. And in a statement to the court, she called her trial political and begged the judge to be lenient to give her a chance to be a mother. Quote, if you put me in jail for 12 years, I will be too old to bear a child, unquote. She was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison, and her prison term was extended by 2 more in April before being freed. Ksenia Fadeyeva, 32, is a Russian dissident who joined Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny's team because she said she wanted to change Russia. Quote, I love my country, but I know something is wrong here, unquote. She told the Post in a 2021 interview in the Siberian city of Tomsk. Fadeyeva was the head of Navalny's team in Tomsk, and she was with Navalny in August 2020, helping him make a political film hours before he was poisoned with a chemical nerve agent at his Tomsk hotel, which nearly killed him. She was detained in December 2021 after Navalny's political group was labeled as extremist. In December of last year, she was sentenced 9 years in prison on extremism charges. Why am I getting stuck on that word? This is so sad. Oleg Orlov, at 71, is one of Russia's oldest political prisoners. He is a dissident whose activism dates back to Soviet times when he illegally printed and distributed pamphlets opposing the Soviet Union's war in Afghanistan. He is also the co chair of one of Russia's storied human rights organizations called Memorial, which was awarded Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. Orlov was charged with discrediting the Russian military after publishing an article in 2022 criticizing Russia's war in Ukraine. He refused to participate in his trial and sat in court reading Franz Kafka's The Trial, a novel about the surreal helplessness of a man arrested and executed after doing nothing wrong and without ever knowing the allegations against him. Now that is bold. Sir, I gotta tell you, that is bold. Ooh. Mm. In his speech to the court, Orlov said that unlike the novel's protagonist, quote, we do know the real reason why we're being detained, tried, arrested, sentenced, and killed. We are being punished for daring to criticize the authorities, unquote. Next is Ilya Yashin, one of Russia's most prominent opposition figures and who was close to Alexei Navalny and Boris Nemtsov, two opposition leaders. Nemtsov was assassinated near the Kremlin in 2015. Yashin, 41, was jailed for 8.5 years after criticizing Russia's war on Ukraine. After the sentencing, he told the court, quote, I do not regret anything, unquote. In prison, he was repeatedly sent to punishment cells, but he continues to communicate with the outside world through his lawyers, who convey his social media posts. Last week, he told the story of a cellmate whose father volunteered to fight in the Ukraine, who was twice wounded and then went missing in a frontline assault. He says, quote, the hell that was never meant to be. A war that should have never been started, unquote. The next one is at 19 years old is Kevin Lick, L-I-K. He is a German-born and is one of Russia's youngest prisoners accused of treason. He grew up near Cologne until the age of 12 when his Russian mother moved him to the city of Maykop in southern Russia. The country's Federal Security Service accused him of photographing military sites in the region as a minor late in 2021 and shortly before the Ukraine invasion and sending them to a foreign state. He was convicted of treason and sentenced to 4 years in prison in a close trial. Rico Krieger, in a surprise move Tuesday, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko pardoned Rico Krieger. He is a German citizen who had been sentenced to death in Belarus on terrorism charges. Krieger, 30, last week appeared in a heavily choreographed 17-minute interview on a state TV channel after his conviction, where he was confessing to planting explosives near a railway line last year on the orders of the Security Service of Ukraine. He said during the recording that the agency also told him to photograph military sites. Now, Krieger's trial was murky because no independent media coverage or public evidence was actually presented. His unexpected pardon came hours after he formally requested it. Next is Dieter Voronin, who is a political scientist who holds dual Russian-German citizenship. He was detained in 2021 by Russian security officers in connection to a treason case against journalist and former advisor to the head of the Russian space agency, Ivan Safronov. According to Safronov's lawyer, Russian investigators accused the journalist of passing information about Russian military personnel in Syria to Voronin in 2015 in exchange for $248. They also alleged that Voronin, in turn, passed the information to employees of a university in Zurich and the German Foreign Intelligence Service, the BND. The Russian business daily Kommersant reported that Voronin initially admitted wrongdoing but then reversed his statements. Last year, Voronin was sentenced to more than 13 years in prison, while Safronov was sentenced to 22 years in 2022. Next is Patrick Skobel. In many ways, the case of Patrick Skobel, a German national, mirrors that of WNBA star Brittany Griner. He was arrested at Pulkovo International Airport in St. Petersburg when customs officers found six gummy bears containing cannabis in his luggage. He was charged with drug smuggling, a sentence carrying up to 7 years. And like Griner's, Skobel's case raised fears that Russian authorities were amping up arrests of foreigners as bargaining chips in a prisoner exchange. He was arrested on February 14th, just 5 days after Putin showed his desire for an exchange involving convicted Russian assassin Vadim Krasikov, who was at the time being held in Germany during an interview with right wing commentator Tucker Carlson. German Moises, that is the name of the released prisoner, a Russian German lawyer who was the managing partner of a consultancy that helped Russians obtain European residency permits, was detained in St. Petersburg in late May and charged with treason in a secretive case, which is the norm in Russia. Moises, 39, was also a founder of the St. Petersburg cycling movement and director of an organization that develops the city's cycling infrastructure. He grew up mostly in Germany before returning to Russia about 6 years ago. Vadim Ostanin is another associate of Navalny and was convicted on extremism, is it? Charges last year and sentenced to 9 years in a penal colony. He was the head of a local branch of Navalny's team in the Siberian city of Barnaul. Ostanin was detained in 2021 after Navalny's organization was labeled as extremist by Russian government, and after Navalny's death, the State Department's Human Rights Bureau made a social media post to quote, remember his associates now serving sentences on politically motivated charges stemming from the baseless designation of his movement as extremist, unquote. Along with a photo of Ostanin, the State Department said independent thought is not a crime, and jailing opposition voices will not hide the Kremlin's crimes, unquote. Andrei Pivovarov, 42, is a St. Petersburg opposition figure and head of the defunct rights group Open Russia, who had planned to run in Russian parliamentary elections in September 2022, but in May of that year, he was on a plane awaiting takeoff for Warsaw when masked Federal Security Service agents boarded and dragged him away. He was charged with running an undesirable organization, which is a designation used by Russian authorities to crush opposition groups, and sentenced to 4 years in prison in July of 2022. He didn't care and ran for election anyway, even from behind bars in a courtroom. Dang, bold. Sheesh, the balls in this guy. And the other dude, who was reading Franz Kafka's novel while he was in the courtroom being sentenced. As the only political prisoner to run for election in Russian history, he knew he would lose, but his unusual campaign drew stark attention to Russian authorities' strategy of rigging elections by barring almost all opposition candidates, which is key to Putin's grip on power. Next is Alexander Skochelenko, a pacifist, Russian artist and musician with no history of political activism, and was sentenced to 7 years in prison by a St. Petersburg court in November 2023 for an anti-war protest, covering 5 supermarket price tags with stickers giving information about Russia's war against Ukraine. The Russian army bombed an art school in Mariupol where about 400 people were hiding from shelling. Read one. And on another, quote, weekly inflation reached a new high not seen since 1998 because of our military actions in Ukraine. Stop the war, unquote. A shopper alerted the police when they saw, these stickers, and the musician was arrested in April 2022 and charged with spreading quote unquote fake news about the military. At a St. Petersburg court during her sentencing, Skochelenko, wearing one of her trademark bright shirts with a red heart emblazoned on the front, told the judge, quote, "Everyone sees and knows that you are not judging a terrorist. You are not judging an extremist. You are not even judging a political activist. You are judging a pacifist," unquote. Now, those returning to Russia is Vadim Krasikov, 58, a convicted Russian assassin who had been serving a life sentence in Germany for the 2019 murder of a former Chechen fighter in a Berlin park. Krasikov, who operated in Germany under the name Vadim Sokolov, shot Selim Khan Kangashvili 3 times in Berlin after tailing him on a bicycle. He is accused of using the same tactic in a 2013 murder in a Moscow suburb, although official charges were withdrawn. He was also convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison in a Berlin court in 2021. The killing, German prosecutors said, was a political murder ordered by the Kremlin. The quote unquote state sponsored murder, Germany said, was a quote serious violation of German law and Germany's sovereignty. I didn't say that right. Ugh. Next is Vladislav Klyushin, 42, is a Russian businessman with ties to the Kremlin. In September 2023, he was sentenced to 9 years in a U.S. prison after being convicted of participating in $93 million insider trading scheme that involved hacking corporate computer networks. And in Russia, Klyushin opened an information technology company called M13 that did work for the Russian government. He was arrested in Switzerland in 2021 after arriving on a private jet just before a helicopter was supposed to take him to a nearby ski resort. He is believed to have pocketed at least 34 million in the scheme, according to the Justice Department. Next to go back to Russia is Roman Selesnev, the son of a Russian legislator. Roman Selesnev was convicted in 2016 by a U.S. federal court in Washington state for orchestrating a cyber attack on thousands of American businesses. He infiltrated point of sale systems to steal and sell credit card information, which led to a loss of 169 million for financial institutions. In 2017, he received a 27-year prison sentence, the longest ever imposed for hacking in the United States. And in the same year, he also admitted to having been involved in a racketeering operation in Nevada, as well as a conspiracy to commit bank fraud in Georgia, which he was given two 14-year sentences to be served concurrently with his Washington sentence. Next is Vadim. Oh my gosh, they have a lot of Vadims. Vadim Konoshchenok, a Russian citizen with alleged connections to Russia's Federal Security Service, who was arrested in Estonia and extradited to the United States on July 13, 2023. U.S. officials stated that Konoshchenok smuggled American-made electronics and ammunition to support Moscow's war efforts in the Ukraine, using front companies to hide his operations and violating U.S. sanctions. He is believed to have been part of a complex transnational scheme coordinated by Russian intelligence services. And there's a duo of Artem Doltsev and Anna Doltseva. They are a Russian couple who pose as Argentine expats living an ordinary life in Slovenia. And they were sentenced to 19 months each in the Slovenian capital after they pleaded guilty to espionage. They were accused of operating as deep cover agents for Russia's foreign intelligence services. The husband ran an IT company, went by the name Ludwig Gish. How do you get if you were Argentine expats, why would your name be Ludwig Gish? And the wife, who had an online art gallery, went by Maria Rosa Mayer Munoz. Okay, that sounds more Argentine than Ludwig Gish. It was all a cover for their Russian intelligence jobs. The couple was arrested in December 2022 and released on Wednesday for time served, according to the Associated Press. Next is Pablo Gonzalez. Polish authorities announced they had arrested Pavel Rubstov, who also goes by the name Pablo Gonzalez, on suspicion that he was conducting intelligence activities in 22, alleging that he was posing as a journalist while working for Russia's military intelligence agency. The Spanish Russian national was covering the war in Ukraine for Spanish media along the Ukrainian border when he was detained. In February, Reporters Without Borders marked his second year in custody, urging Poland to substantiate its allegations and release Gonzalez as he awaits trial. Quote, in a European Union country, it is highly unusual to keep a journalist in detention for 2 years without a trial and on secret charges. We urge the Polish judicial authorities to release Pablo Gonzalez before he can defend himself in court, said Pavel Zalazai, the head of the EU and Balkans region for Reporters Without Borders. Next, we have Mikhail Valerievich Mikushin. He is a Norwegian domestic security authorities. Oh, sorry. In October 2022, Norwegian domestic security authorities arrested a man who entered the country claiming to be a Brazilian academic working on Arctic security issues on suspicion of being a Russian spy. In Norway, he called himself Jose Assis Ja Maria and worked at a local university in the Arctic city of Tromsø. Norwegian investigators later identified him as Mikhail Valerievich Mikushin of Russia. Weeks before his arrest, the man had attended a seminar on hybrid threats, including about a response to a gas pipeline explosion local media had reported. And at the time, the Nord Stream pipeline in the Baltic Sea had recently been damaged in explosions. Now, we also have Americans still remaining in Russia. One is Mark Fogel, a teacher at the Anglo-American School of Moscow, who spent 27 years teaching overseas, nearly didn't return to Russia in 2021 after almost a decade at the school. But he and his wife, Jane, agreed to spend one more year in Moscow before retiring. Following summer break, he was arrested at the airport in August 2021 and charged with smuggling a small quantity of cannabis prescribed in the United States for back pain, but banned in Russia. He was given a 14-year jail term and has been actually teaching English to prisoners. So the Pittsburgh area native felt ignored by the government during the last prisoner swap. But he has tried to maintain a positive outlook, family member said. And in a letter to his wife, he wrote, quote, I have lots of love, positive energy to give back to my community in the future, end quote. Next is Robert Romanov Woodland. He was born in Russia and adopted as a toddler by an American couple in 1993 and was sentenced in July to 12 and a half years in prison on drug charges. The dual citizen moved back to Russia in 2020 and worked as an English teacher, according to a Facebook profile with his name and birthday. Quote, the truth is that I am not an American at all, but a Russian, unquote. He told the Moscow newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda in 2020. There is also Gordon Black. U.S. Army Staff Sergeant Gordon Black seemed smitten with a Russian woman, Alexandra Vashuk, with whom he started a romantic relationship with while stationed in South Korea. And when she returned to the far eastern Russian city of Vladivostok, The love struck American soldier stupidly followed her earlier this year without notifying his commander. Sir! In June, a Russian court found him guilty of stealing 10,000 rubles, which is about $120 from Vachuk, and for threatening to kill her, according to state media. He was sentenced to nearly 4 years in a Russian penal colony. Now, the Russian news agency Interfax reported that the couple got into a fight in their shared apartment, and during which he allegedly grabbed her by the neck and took her money. As per Gordon Black, he said that the woman began hitting him and that he needed the money for a hotel room. Now, Black's mother, Melody Jones, said the family had hoped he would be a part of the prisoner swap, but they are optimistic he will have another opportunity following his appeal scheduled later this month. In the meantime, she is still waiting for a first opportunity to hear from her son, saying, quote, "It would be nice to talk to him just once or write to him even just once," unquote. And also, it has been reported that allegedly Gordon Black is still married to a woman in the United States. Like, sir, ugh, I cannot with you. Next is Robert Gilman, a former U.S. Marine of Massachusetts, had been serving 3.5 years in Russia, which was reduced from 4.5 for kicking a police officer while he was drunk in the western Russian city of Voronezh. Gilman told the court that he did not remember the incident, but he apologized to the officer at that time. Like that would make a difference. You're in Russia, sir. While serving that sentence, he was handed down new charges of attacking prison guards and an investigator in 2024, the Moscow Times reported. Now, Gilman had gone to Russia to study and obtain citizenship, his lawyers told Russian state news agency TASS. And next we have Ksenia Karelina, who Russia's Federal Security Service announced is being charged of, or has been arrested and is being charged on treason charges. She is a ballerina turned esthetician at a Beverly Hills spa in Los Angeles, and she has been accused of collecting funds for a Ukrainian organization that was aiding the Ukrainian military. Carolina's boyfriend, Chris Van Heerden, whom she lived with in West LA, gifted her a ticket back to Russia in December to visit family for her birthday. But upon arrival, Russian authorities confiscated her phone, she told her boyfriend, and she didn't return after she tried to retrieve it. And when she didn't return after she tried to retrieve it from government officials later in the week, that's when they found out that she had been accused of transferring $51.80 to a charity fund that buys medical equipment for Ukrainian first responders. Next is David Barnes, a Texas resident who was sentenced in February to 21 years in prison on charges that he abused his two sons in the United States. The allegations had been investigated in Texas, but authorities said they found no grounds for the charges. And amid custody proceedings in the United States, Barnes' ex-wife allegedly violated a court order by taking their two children to Russia. He was arrested after going to visit his children there. Oh my goodness. Next is Eugene Spector, a Russian-born U.S. citizen, an executive at a medical device company, had already been serving a 3.5-year prison sentence for bribery when he was handed an additional and more severe charge of espionage in 2023. He pleaded guilty to enabling a bribe to an aide of a former Russian deputy prime minister. That aide, Anastasia Alexeyeva, was sentenced to 12 years for taking bribes around 2015 that came in the form of expensive vacations to Thailand and the Dominican Republic. Details of the espionage charges were not made public. And the last one is Michael Travis Leak, an American expat, former paratrooper and frontman of Moscow-based rock band Lovinok, was arrested in June of 2023 on charges of selling drugs and sentenced to 13 years in a maximum security prison colony. Holy cow. In a 2014 episode of the TV series, quote, Anthony Bourdain, parts unknown, unquote, leaked then band managers spoke out against the repression of free speech in Russia, alleging that an episode from a separate documentary featuring his band was cut because of Kremlin interference. Quote, this was a documentary series about musicians standing up and risking their lives in some cases to stand up against government abuse of power, government corruption, end quote. And he added, quote, and yet a foreign government was able to editorially control what American viewers see on their TV screens. That to me is a scandal of epic proportion, and unquote. Also, it is noted that Alex Horton in Washington contributed to this report by the Washington Post. Darlings, we have a lot more people that we have to get home, and I am hopeful that in due time they will be. I'm sure that this recent prisoner swap is not the only one that the only arrangement that our government is working on, but obviously they're not publicizing it for fears of talks breaking down because of differing interests, right? And hopefully, again, we get all of our citizens home. And just be careful when you travel to countries that have obvious conflicts with the United States because you don't ever want to be in the shoes of these prisoners and ex-prisoners. You do not want to be in their shoes in any capacity at all. And darlings, with that, just remember to leave grace for others. Stay fabulous because you are fabulous. And remember to journey in gratitude. I shall see you all later in the next go round. Toodaloo for now. Bye.